you realize it's never going to go away. It's a very different 2 a.m. is a dark hour, I can tell you that.
Welcome back to my Mental Health and Crime channel. My name is Sudhir London. This is the case of the Idaho quadruple murders that took place on the 13th of November 2022. May the 4 victims rest in peace. Condolence to their families. We are still waiting for the forensic evidence to be turned over to the defense attorney of Brian Christopher Kohlberger so that we can find out exactly how the prosecutors have come to this conclusion that it is Brian Christopher Kohlberger that actually was the one that went into 1122 Kings Road and did this horrific quadruple murders. This was a article put up in Facebook by someone who knows John Showalter in Boise, Idaho. I've explained this before, and she wanted to help with this case, and she came across Jack Showalter, hoodie guy, in the grub truck video, and she wanted to give her feedback of something that she has experienced, basically stalking behaviors, harassing behaviors towards females, towards her and a friend that worked in the same restaurant as Showalter. I know that many people allegedly believed from the beginning that John Showalter could have been involved in the quadruple murders. Although he was ruled out, there's many things of John Jack Showalter's behaviors that are still in question. I'm sure he had a pretty good alibi to be ruled out. But I don't think that really anyone was checked properly from the beginning. Even Kaylee Gongav's, his father, Steve, believes that many people have been ruled out too early. This is what the girl wrote on Facebook. So this is her experience with him. Allegedly, he comes across to be very disrespectful to women, female, and how he speaks to them. He was kicked out of his fraternity, Delta Tau, for bad behaviors towards females, and he was allegedly harassing Maddie and Kaylee that night in the corner club. He was thrown out for harassing females. Whether it was Kaylee and Maddie or if it was 2 other females, he was harassing someone. He's very skilled in hunting. We saw the picture where there was 2 K-bar knives in front of him, one in his hand and one on the floor. And he seemed to be very upset when the girls left him in the grub truck. There were 3 unidentified male DNAs found there, so I wonder where Showalter was at that time of the crimes. He drove 2 a.m. in the morning to Boise, Idaho, to his family's cabin that is almost 6 hours away from Idaho, Moscow. Was he drunk when he was driving? Was he sober? Was he any form of driving? What car did he drive? This girl had to literally slap Jack Showalter to get him to move. He was calling them the dumb B word. Has Hoodie Guy been in 1122 Kings Road? It's kind of strange. He seems to know the girls well. And I wonder if he knew Murphy the dog. I believe it was someone who knew the girls. And Eaton. I believe all four were the targets. And I believe there's a motive to it, or a couple of motives. The timeline was originally 3 to 4 a.m. Maddie seems to be upset. She pointed her finger to Jack Showalter.
Koberger case, because this is something we haven't focused on in a little bit, and we really should. As we know, the 28-year-old former criminology student is charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and burglary in connection with the brutal slayings of 4 University of Idaho students back in November of 2022. Gailey Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Zahner Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. And we are all anticipating what the prosecution is going to present in Koberger's upcoming preliminary hearing, which is scheduled for the week of June 26th. As we know, preliminary hearings are the opportunity for the prosecution to present evidence of probable cause that he committed these crimes, all in support of these charges, also that this case can ultimately proceed to trial. That's the purpose of a preliminary hearing. This is the prosecution's burden to basically show their hand. But as we know, the defense cross-examine these witnesses, the state's witnesses, maybe even present their own evidence, so it's really interesting. So as we wait for all that, there have now been some recent developments that I want to get into, and that brings me right now to retired FBI agent and attorney Bobby Chacon. Bobby, so good to see you, friend of the program. Haven't seen you on Sidebar in quite some time, so it's good to have you back.
It's good to be back, Jesse. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so let's start with the major development. The major development regarding Bethany Funk. Bethany Funk was one of the 2 surviving roommates in that house. She was in the house when the killings happened in the early morning hours of November 13th. Now, Koberger's defense originally subpoenaed her to appear at the preliminary hearing, but then both sides agreed to quash that subpoena because Funk has agreed to be interviewed by the defense in Reno, Nevada, where she lives. Now, the question is, why do they want to speak with her? Well, according to an affidavit that was filed by the defense's criminal investigator, Richard Battanti, wrote, quote, Bethany Funk has information material to the charges against Mr. Koberger. She was interviewed by police on several occasions. She disclosed things she heard and things she saw. Portions of information Ms. Funk has is exculpatory to the defendant. Ms. Funk's information is unique to her experiences and cannot be provided by another witness. Wow. Okay, so Bobby, as we know, exculpatory means information that would show Brian Koberger's innocent. What do you make of that?
Well, yes, it does. That's exactly what exculpatory means. However, the interpretation of whether a piece of testimony is exculpatory or not is very open to interpretation. And so while the investigator says she has things or stuff that is exculpatory to Brian Koberger, that's their interpretation of that, whatever that be. So arguably, in a case like this, in this case in particular, she is probably the most important witness. She's the only living eyewitness, if you want to call her an eyewitness, to the crimes that happened. So she.
Well, also we have Dylan Mortensen, who's the other surviving roommate. She's the one who allegedly saw the killer. So it's, that's a very separate issue.
Both of these people in the house are really the only 2 eyewitnesses, so to speak. And so the defense is going to want to get into them as much as they can. They want to, what we call dirty them up if they can at trial, and anything that they can get to before trial helps them. So any statement, as part of the discovery process, that the defense gets all of the statements that this witness has made to the police, in any way. And so they've reviewed those statements now, and they want to talk more at length about those things to this witness. Before cross-examination, because I've had it where, in my own statements, where defense litigators will get into the littlest detail that you give and try to make you give an inconsistent statement prior to trial, so they can bring that out at trial as an inconsistent statement and maybe look like your memory is bad or you're lying or you really don't know what you're talking about. That's particularly important in cases of like height. I've seen it done in height where the person says, the witness will say, the guy was about 5'8", and then the police say, well, could he have been 5'8" or 5'10"? And the person says, well, yeah, he could have been 5'8", 5'9", 5'10" in that area. And then the defense says, well, if he could have been 5'8" or 5'10", could he have been 6 foot or 6'1"? And then you've got somebody from 5'8" to 6'1", and they dirty up a witness that way, and then the witness's recollection looks really unreliable. And so in this case, I think what they want to do is they want to get into some of the details of what they told police and try to create seemingly inconsistencies.
When they were fighting the subpoena, basically said, quote, that this is without support, there's no further information or detail, and they're basically kind of, watering down what information she has. But here's what we do know. Bobby, that she and this other roommate, Dylan Mortensen, were inside that residence at the time of the killings, that they were roommates to the victims. We believe that Ms. Funk was in the first floor bedroom. According to the probable cause affidavit that came out when they ultimately arrested Brian Kohberger, according to Funk, she saw Ethan Chapin and Zana Kernodle at a fraternity house from approximately 9 p.m. on November 12th to 1:45 a.m. on November 13th. She also estimated that at approximately 1:45, both Chapin and Kernodle returned to the residence. She also stated that Chapin didn't live in the King Road residence, which we know he was a guest of Kernodle. And she also said, or was also said in this probable cause affidavit, that Funk and Mortensen both told police that the other occupants of the home returned back November 13th at around 2 a.m. and that they were asleep or at least in their rooms by approximately 4 a.m. But there's one other thing. In the probable cause affidavit, apparently police reviewed forensic downloads from Funk's phone and determined that the homicides occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. So that's important information about the timeline. Remember, according to this criminal investigator, that whatever information Funk has, it's unique to her. Is there anything about that, the fact that she's so instrumental in putting the timeline, that the defense is trying to chip away at? Because if they can say the killings didn't happen at these times, or her timeline's wrong, that may help Brian Kohberger.
Sure, it may help him, but it's hard to see how that could be exculpatory. In other words, unless they're prepared to prove that Brian Kohberger was somewhere else at that time, if they can say, oh, well, it must have happened between here and here, but we have proof that Brian was over here at that time, that can conceivably be exculpatory. But oftentimes the defense will say something like, well, this proves that there might have been somebody else in the house or something like that, and that's not necessarily exculpatory. If there's somebody else involved in the crime, that's not necessarily exculpatory to this defendant. They might be trying to say that, you have video of his Elantra in a certain place at a certain time, and if the crimes happened here, how could he have been in that house when his Elantra is on video over here at that time? So they're trying to, play with the timeline, and they may think they have something like that where, if you're saying this is him and this Elantra, which we're going to say it is, well, then the times don't match because the Elantra's on video over here. And now I don't agree that that's what the timeline shows, but that may be the line that they're going down.
I find this to be very interesting. Could it be possible that Bethany Funk knew where Brian Christopher Kohberger was that night? Would that make sense? Because she has something, a portion of material that is unique compared to Dear. So was Brian maybe talking to Bethany? Or was she a witness to where he was. The reason I have to say this mindfully. The reason I do not believe BF and DM is if they did what was right as lawful, obedient citizens and called 911 immediately. Oh, it's okay. Don't even call 911 immediately. Just say you were in shock. What about calling 911 in 3 hours time, 5 hours time? And then on top of that, they managed to call the Sigma boys, Hunter Johnson, Eaton, his brother, may rest in peace. They called the whole world, except the police. The police were the last people to find out. In fact, 911, the ambulance was the first ones notified after